Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Cold-Blooded Serial. I am your host and true crime bestie, Tika. Imagine pulling into the parking lot of your place of employment, a hospital, and you see a crazed man beating a young female employee to a bloody pulp. Both you and your carpool buddy step out of the car. Your buddy walks towards the violent man, yelling for him to stop. You keep your distance, also yelling for him to stop. The crazed man looks up at your friend, and in an instant, you witness your friend get shot in the head. Everything is happening so fast that it looks like it's in slow motion. The victim stands and begins to run away. You know that you should run too, but fear has your legs feeling like cement and you cannot move. And then boom, a piece of her brain flies out of her skull as her body hits the concrete. You snap out of it and try to make it to your car as you feel bullets whiz past your head. You enter the car and glass shards fill the car as the maniac is firing rounds your way. Your name is Audra Dillon, and you were the only survivor of the Valentines Day Massacre in Rochester, New York on February 14th, 2009 at 5:45 a.m. So let's find out what happened to lead to this horrific and tragic event on this early Valentine's Day morning. So for several months, Miss Mary Silliman, 23 years old, had been sexually harassed by her supervisor, Frank Garcia. The two of them were friends at first, often sharing stories about their lives during their smoke breaks. Mary was oblivious to his sexual advances at first. You know, he seemed flirtatious, but not harmful. But as the months went on, his advances became increasingly apparent. One time he offered her $600 as a loan to fix her van. Another time he offered her $500 to sleep with one of his female friends. Each time, she refused his offers. But yet, she still didn't think that he would get violent. She didn't report him because she was like, it's just old Frank. He's harmless. One night, he's off from work. She's outside having a smoke break, and he pulls up to the hospital, asks her to come sit in his car so they can talk. She gets in the car, not thinking anything of it because she still thinks Frank is harmless, okay? So while they're in the car talking, Frank leans over and tries to kiss her. She pushes him away and exits the car. Shortly after, she receives a text from him saying that she'd be written up. Of course, she's like, why? And he says, $500 to have sex with me. Friends, what? Like, that's not an answer as to why you're going to write someone up. Listen, he is something, okay? Like, I can't even think of the words right now. It'll probably come to me later when I'm not recording, but he is something. So, of course, she turns him down again. And, that threat of being written up, it was just that. It was just a threat. He never writes her up, and he doesn't actually respond as to why he said that. So the next time that they're working the same shift at Lakeside Hospital, he calls her into his office and he has $500 in cash spread out on the table. She's probably looking at him like, what the hell? Like, guy, how many times do I have to say no? Like, why isn't this getting through your skull? Like, no is no. Well, eventually he becomes more aggressive and predatory like. And unfortunately, she still hasn't reported him, okay? It isn't until he starts saying things like this: $500 to fuck me, $500 to suck my dick. Like, what? So that to her was the red flag. That's when she's like, you know what? Like, this guy is not getting it and he's becoming more aggressive and it's kind of scary, right? No one should ever approach a woman like that. Like, he's only seeing her as a sex symbol and that's it. So after this, she reports him. And poor Mary, she can't even go home and tell her boyfriend because her boyfriend is abusive and has actually beat her because of the text messages that her boss has sent her. Poor Mary, she just can't win. On February 5th, 2009, she reports her boss of sexual harassment due to the frequency and his sexually aggressive attitude towards her. The hospital then terminates him, as this was not the first time that a female employee has reported him. All right, so that is a little bit of the backstory as to why on February 14th, 2009, Audra Dillon and her friend Randall Norman witnessed Mary Silliman being beat to a bloody pulp. All right, so we're going to go back to that little introduction. After Audra Dillon had been shot at multiple times, she was able to drive herself to the police station, which was about a mile from the hospital. She explained to them what happened to her and how she didn't see the assailant, but knew that he was either Latino, biracial, or light-skinned black man. So, Detective Patrick Crough had been assigned to the case, and he makes his way to Lakeside Hospital in Brockport, New York. He speaks with the employees, and they told him that Frank Garcia was always friendly, but him and Mary were always together on their smoke breaks. They also informed him of her jealous boyfriend, who was also abusive. One of the supervisors actually told the detective that Frank was recently terminated by Lakeside Hospital for inappropriate behavior towards a female employee he supervised, which was Mary Silliman. He did threaten the hospital, but he didn't have a history of being violent, and they just thought that he meant, like, hey, I'm going to sue you for unjustified termination. Guy, Mary has proof on her phone of all of the threats and harassments that you've been sending her. So it was definitely justifiable for you to get terminated. All right, so about 30 to 40 minutes away in the city of Rochester, Audra Dillon was at Strong Hospital, and an investigator was sent to speak with her before her surgery. She tells the investigator that her friend Randall Norman had pulled into the hospital parking lot with her when they witnessed a man of color beating a small blonde woman. She said that the man had her by the hair and was dragging her away from her vehicle and punching and kicking her repeatedly. Audra and Randall got out of the vehicle, yelling for the man to stop. Randall keeps making his way towards this crazed man, even though the man kept telling Randall to mind his own business and to stay out of it. Randall refused to back down. He's like, no, I'm going to be a hero today. I'm going to help save this young lady that you're beating. When the crazy man realizes that Randall is not stopping, he lets go of the young lady's hair. He pulls out a handgun. He crouches into a police shooting stance. Like, okay, are you an ex-cop? Or like, were you in the military? Or like, are you just like obsessed? Like, do you want to just seem like you have some type of authority, you know? Because like for movies, most guys are just going to pull out the gun and just start shooting. They don't get into like perfect position to take aim and then fire. He's like, no, he's like, I'm going to do this the right way. Anyways, let's continue. So, this man crouches down into a police shooting stance and he fires 3 rounds at Randall Norman. The hero is what I'm going to call Randall because he tried. Unfortunately, he didn't survive, but he definitely tried to save this young woman. So, Randall Norman was shot in the chest, his right arm, the back of the head, and behind his right ear. The gunman then pivoted to the left, aimed his gun at Mary Silliman, who was running away from him, and he fired 2 rounds in the back of her head, blowing off the back of her skull. Friends, like, what the heck? To be able to have like such precise aim as someone's running, it's insane. Like he had a very powerful gun because her skull like just blew off. So I can't imagine the trauma that poor Audra went through after witnessing all of this. So after he took the lives of Randall and Mary, he turns his attention to the last witness, Audra Dillon, and she's running to her vehicle, horrified as he begins firing at her. She makes it into her vehicle and begins to pull away as her windshield and the driver's side window explodes into shattering glass. Some of the rounds ended up ripping into Audra's upper torso, seriously wounding her as she sped off towards the police station for help. that is exactly what happened. And Audra was able to share this information with the investigator right before she went into surgery. So the detectives ended up putting a bolo out for both Frank Garcia and Mary Silliman's boyfriend. Meanwhile, in Hamlin, New York, investigators Kevin Garvey and Andy White were told to go to Frank Garcia's home. Of course, he wasn't there, but they were able to meet with his wife, who told the investigators that her husband hadn't been home all night and that he's been depressed from being fired from his job. So she said that he left their home the night before and that early this morning, so early on Valentine's Day morning, he calls her and tells her to watch the news. Friends, what? Okay, if that doesn't make him sound guilty, I don't know what does. He tells her to watch the news and that she'll be receiving a letter in the mail. So did he write her like a suicide letter? Like, was he gonna kill Mary and then kill himself? I don't know. Let's keep diving in, okay? Let's find out what's going on. So, Frank's wife was worried that her husband would harm himself because he hasn't been doing well since he lost his job. But she was almost positive that no one else would be in danger because he was not a violent man. So all of this evilness that's inside of him, he kept away from his family. Like, they had no idea that he has been harassing female employees. They had no idea about his secret evil demeanor. So I can't imagine the shock that she must have felt when the news broke. Based on Mrs. Garcia's statement to the investigator, lead detective Patrick Crough now viewed Frank Garcia as their main suspect. They ended up running a background check, and then they actually found a phone number for Frank's sister. So they're like, oh, he might be going there to hide out. They called her and then they played it as if Frank was innocent and they were searching for him to make sure Mary's boyfriend didn't go after him. So, of course, concerned for his safety, she's like, oh my God, no, let me give you Frank's cell phone number because I want him to be safe. Detective Crough ends up calling Frank, and both of them are playing innocent. Frank is acting like he has no idea what happened that morning. The detective is acting as if Frank is in trouble from the boyfriend, but like that he's not actually in trouble with the police. So the detective tells him that, him and his family might be in danger as Mary Silliman's boyfriend is still on the loose and that he needs to know where Frank is. Frank tells him that he's at Durand Eastman Park. The detective doesn't believe him, so he works with the phone company to ping his location. Come to find out, he's in Canandaigua, which is nowhere near Durand Eastman Park. So they're about an hour away from each other, give or take, okay? And the detective is like, what the heck is he doing out in Canandaigua? And why would he lie and say that he's at Eastman Park? About an hour after speaking to Frank, Detective Crough receives a phone call from an investigator named Steve Peglow, advising the detective that a former female co-worker of Frank Garcia's was murdered. Let's talk about this situation. So, Kimberly Glatz, age 38, and her husband, Christopher Glatz, age 45, were home the day of Valentine's Day, along with her 2 children from a previous marriage, her 14-year-old daughter, Heather, and her 13-year-old son, Shane. The police says that around 10:30 a.m., Frank Garcia entered their home, yelling at Kim Glatz. Her husband, Christopher Glatz, tried to calm him down, and Frank, who is 34 years old, is acting like erratic, okay? So they're trying to calm him down. Kim Glatz ends up calling her 14-year-old daughter down, and Frank tells her, hey, make sure you take care of your brother. Her 13-year-old brother, Shane, has cerebral palsy and can't walk, So Kim probably has her arm around her daughter to try to protect her from the psycho. And friends, he does the weirdest thing. He tells her that he wants breakfast. He tells the 14-year-old, he tells her to go in the kitchen and make him some toast with butter and bring him a glass of water. Afterwards, he makes her wash the dishes and his cigarette butts. I'm guessing he was like, you know what? We're getting rid of any DNA evidence proving that I was here. So he sends Heather back upstairs. And once again, he's like, hey, take care of your brother. She's like, is everyone going to be okay? And he's like, listen, he's like, I'm not going to harm you and I'm not going to harm your parents. I just want you to go upstairs and take care of your brother. Heather runs upstairs into her brother's room. She turns up the radio loud enough for her brother not to hear, but she was able to hear Frank tell her parents to write down the names and the addresses of their family members and demanded $25,000 from her mom and stepdad. Her parents ask Frank if he'd leave them alone if they gave him the money. And he says, no, someone has to die. He tells them, if you don't send the $25,000 to my wife, which, oh my God, you guys, when he says, expect a letter from me, I wonder if it was like the check, like if he wants the Glatz family to write a check to his wife and it would be sent in the mail. When I first read this story, I didn't even pick up on that. All right, so Frank has his green Ford parked in the Glatz's driveway. And he's like, hey, Chris, I need you to go move my car into your driveway. Don't try anything. Otherwise, I'm going to kill everyone in your home. So Chris runs out. He pulls the car in and he comes right back inside. When he comes back in, his wife is begging Frank to let them live. Her daughter hears her mom begging and pleading for their lives. The 14-year-old comes back downstairs to confront Frank because remember, he said that he wasn't going to harm anyone. Heather looks Frank in the eyes and says, you promised nothing would happen. And he said, I know, but I have to go back on my words and you need to go back upstairs. She knew at that moment that that would be her last time seeing her mom. Friends, I cannot even imagine what the mom and her firstborn child must be feeling, knowing that today, probably at this very moment, this would be the last time they see each other. My eyes right now, like you probably don't hear it in my voice, but my eyes right now are teary. Like I am so heartbroken for this family. So Heather makes her way back upstairs and he asks Chris, he's like, hey, do you want an open casket or a closed casket? Do you want it in the head or the stomach? What? How about neither? What kind of psychotic question is that? Oh my God. So at this time, Kim runs upstairs really quickly to bring her son down in hopes that Frank would have sympathy that her son needs her. Her son Shane begs him not to kill anyone. And Frank responds, do you want your dog to die or your parents? Shane says no one. Frank laughs and tells Chris to carry Shane back upstairs so Shane doesn't have to witness him shoot his parents. Why can't you just take the money and leave? Why does someone have to die? You've made your point. Why can't you just leave? So when the kids hear the first gunshot, they scream and become hysterical. Kim asks to hold her husband as he slowly dies. And of course, Frank says no. He goes upstairs. He tells the kids to shut up. Otherwise, they're going to have the same fate as their stepdad. They quiet down. He leaves them. They hear another gunshot. And he doesn't say anything. He just plays these weird mind games with them by standing in the doorway and staring at them without saying a word. And then he tells them he doesn't kill kids, but he might start now. So finally, Heather asks, is their mom okay? And he was like, yeah, your mom's fine. When I leave, you can go down and see her. But they can't just go down right after he leaves. He tells them to wait 20 minutes or he's going to send his people to finish the job. After 20 minutes, Heather goes downstairs to see her mom, who's face down on the sofa next to her husband. She tries to wake her, but sadly, she has no luck. She ends up running next door to call her dad, who is a deputy sheriff. Kim and Chris Glatz were forced to lay face down on the sofa as a pillow muffled the sound of the .40 caliber at point-blank range. Shortly after Detective Crough learned about the Glatz murders, Frank calls him up, all chipper and calm, as if he hadn't murdered 4 people in one morning. So Frank tells the detective that he's ready to meet with him at a local Tim Hortons in the middle of the city of Rochester. Detective Crough informs him that he's not near because he's checking the houses that Mary's boyfriend might be hiding in, which is all a lie, but Frank doesn't need to know what the cops are actually doing, right? So Frank's like, all right, man, no problem. I'm going to order a coffee and relax till you get here. What, dude? Like, you're a psycho. Oh my gosh. So unbeknownst to Frank, the tactical officers were already on their way to the restaurant to arrest him. But things did not go as planned. A young uniformed officer slowly drove past the restaurant and Frank saw him. Frank steps out of his green vehicle and approaches the young officer with his coffee in hand. Officer Cohen confirms that the man was indeed Frank Garcia. He calmly disarms Frank and placed him under arrest. I think that Frank thinks this young guy is Detective Crough because Detective Crough is playing completely innocent, like he doesn't believe that Frank is guilty of anything. So when this young officer approaches him and he's like, hey, are you Frank? Let me disarm you. I'm just going to take you in and we're going to talk, okay? Frank's like, oh yeah, like this has to be the same guy I've been talking to. At the station, he's still acting as if he's innocent. He denies being at any of the crime scenes, and then he becomes upset that the lead detective kept asking the same questions. But he doesn't know that the lead detective is trying to show that Frank is a liar. What really pissed Frank off was the fact that the police took his guns from him and put handcuffs on him and made him ride in the back of the Impala. Like, how dare you treat me like I'm a criminal? I am an American citizen, and if anything, I need to be sitting right up front with you, officer, okay? With my gun, because I have my rights. Frank, you sound insane. So Detective Crough leaves the interrogation room, giving Frank some time to think. When Detective Crough re-enters, he said that Frank looked emotionally coiled up, as tight as a rattlesnake just before it strikes. And as soon as he began to talk, he said Frank unleashed his wrath, yelling how he's not a criminal because he smoked with Miss Mary Silliman. He yelled that the cops were treating him like such, and he's paid his dues to society, and he hates these handcuffs. So he's still ranting on about how he's American, and he's such an American that even his shoes were made here in America. So the detective continues talking to him about guns, and Frank starts bragging about the best gun to use, and he describes the gun that was used at the crime scene. And Frank gets so upset that this detective hasn't yet released him. So he's like, I need to be released or I need my lawyer. After asking for the lawyer, of course, the detective has to stop talking to him. So what they do is, before they arrest him, they have him stand in the lineup and they call Heather in. Remember, Kim Glatz's daughter? They call her in to identify him in the lineup. She does. And Frank was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder of Mary Silliman and Randall Norman. And then he was also charged with 1 count of second-degree attempted murder for shooting Audrey Dillon. Since he killed people in 2 different counties, he had to be prosecuted twice, once in Monroe County and once in Ontario County. The Glatz trial took place first in Ontario County, and Kim Glatz's 14-year-old daughter, Heather, testified at the trial. The detective said that the courtroom was completely silent, only a sniffle or sad gasp from a family member or friend of the victims. The prosecutor said that after Heather's testimony, he could have rested his case. Frank Garcia was then sentenced to 2 life sentences for the murders of Christopher and Kim Glatz. Now, let's fast forward a few months to the Monroe County trial for the murders of Mary Silliman, Randall Norman, and attempted murder of Audrey Dillon. Based on the testimony of Audra Dillon, the only survivor of the hospital parking lot shooting, Frank Garcia was sentenced to 2 additional life sentences. Justice was served. All right, friends, this is where I leave you. Thanks so much for listening to my bite-sized episode. Stay tuned for more true crime stories. Please like, subscribe, share, and follow. I will talk to you soon. Stay safe. Bye.